The Rocky Mountains do not care about your prayers. They do not care about the stone chapels built into their roots, or the hymns sung in the shadows of their peaks. Up here, near Allenspark, the air is thin enough to starve a man's brain of logic, and the silence is a physical weight that presses against your eardrums until they pulse with the rhythm of your own frantic blood. It is a land of missing 411 cases, a place where the map doesn't match the reality of the ground beneath your boots. The peaks of the Front Range jaggedly tear into the Colorado sky like the broken teeth of an ancient god. Down in the valley, the Camp Saint Malo retreat sits under the gaze of Mount Meeker, a place of supposed sanctuary that has seen things no theology can explain. The pine needles underfoot are dry and brittle, crunching like old bones with every step you take away from the light of civilization. You can feel it the moment you cross the invisible line into the deep timber. That prickle on the back of your neck that tells you that you are no longer the apex predator. A man in his late 20s, disheveled brown hair and a face etched with the weariness of 1,000 sleepless miles, stands by the edge of Cabin Creek. He is wearing a dark olive-green hooded hiking jacket and a grey t-shirt that is stained with the sweat of a long morning. His eyes are tired, fixed on the rushing water as if it holds the answers to questions he is too afraid to ask out loud. He adjusts the straps of his heavy grey backpack, feeling the weight of his gear shift against his aching shoulders. The water of the creek is a frigid, churning silver, roaring over granite boulders with a sound like a distant freight train that never arrives. The humidity is low. The sun, a harsh and unforgiving eye in the pale blue void above. He reached down to tighten the laces on his dark work pants, his fingers trembling just a little in the sudden, unnatural chill that had descended over the clearing. The birds had stopped singing minutes ago, leaving only the white noise of the water to mask the approach of whatever was watching from the brush. There was a movement in the lodgepole pines, not the swaying of branches in the wind, but a shimmering distortion in the air itself. It was like looking through a lens of oily water. A ripple that moved with a fluid, predatory grace between the vertical lines of the trees. It had no color, no shadow, just a warping of the light that made the forest behind it appear to bend and stretch. He felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of vertigo, a feeling that the ground was no longer solid beneath his boots. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as if he could wipe away the hallucination. But the distortion was gone. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise of the creek. It was the kind of silence that precedes a landslide. A total absence of sound that seemed to suck the very breath from his lungs. He turned his head slowly, looking back toward the trail he had just walked. But the path was no longer there. In its place stood a wall of ancient, grey timber that looked as though it had been there for 100 years. He checked his watch, but the hands were frozen at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. The time seemed to have stopped the moment the air grew cold, trapping him in a single, eternal second of dread. He tried to call out, to shout for someone back at the retreat, but his voice died in his throat, a dry rattle that barely carried past his own lips. The mountain had taken his voice, and now it was coming for the rest of him. Panic is a slow poison. It starts in the belly and works its way up to the heart until you are running without knowing why. He scrambled up the embankment, his boots slipping on the loose scree and the wet moss that covered the stones like a carpet of rotting velvet. He didn't look back, but he could hear it behind him, the sound of something heavy moving through the undergrowth without snapping a single twig. It was a phantom footfall, a presence that was always just a few feet behind his heels. Back at the camp, the alarm was eventually raised when the sun began to dip behind the high ridges, casting long, jagged shadows across the valley floor. Search parties were organized. Men with flashlights and heavy coats, their faces grim under the flickering orange glow of the emergency lights. They called his name into the darkness, but the only response was the mocking echo of their own voices bouncing off the stone face of the chapel on the rock. The mountain was holding its breath, waiting for them to give up. Bloodhounds were brought in on the second day, powerful animals trained to find a scent in the most punishing conditions. But when they reached the edge of the creek where he had last been seen, the dogs stopped dead in their tracks. They didn't bark. They didn't whine. They simply sat down and began to shiver, their tails tucked between their legs as they stared into the empty woods. No amount of coaxing could move them forward. They knew there was something in those trees that didn't belong to the world of the living. The search expanded to include hundreds of volunteers and military personnel from the nearby bases. They combed through every square inch of the drainage, looking for a scrap of fabric or a footprint in the mud. They found nothing. Not a single trace of the man who had vanished in broad daylight. It was as if he had been plucked from the surface of the earth by a giant, invisible hand, leaving the forest as pristine and undisturbed as it had been before he arrived. Days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into a long, bitter winter that buried the peaks in 10 feet of unrelenting snow. The search was officially called off, filed away as another unsolved mystery in the growing ledger of the missing 411. The families went home, their lives shattered by the absence of a son, a brother, a man who had simply stepped out of existence. But the mountain does not forget what it hides. It only waits for the thaw. A year later, a group of hikers were making their way along a high, windswept ridge, thousands of feet above the creek bed. The terrain there was brutal. A vertical climb of jagged granite and loose rock that required professional gear and years of experience. They were miles away from the camp, in an area that no lone man in hiking boots could have reached in a single day, let alone survived in the freezing temperatures of a high-altitude night. They found it near a cluster of stunted, wind-twisted trees that looked like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. A gray t-shirt, folded neatly on a flat stone as if it had just come out of a laundry basket. A few feet away, the dark olive-green jacket lay sprawled across the rocks, its zipper still pulled tight to the collar. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No marks of a predator's teeth on the fabric. Just the empty shell of a man's life, discarded in a place where he never should have been. Beneath the jacket, they found the remains, scattered across the scree in a way that defied the laws of biology. The bones were bleached white by the sun and the wind, polished to a high shine as if they had been handled by something with meticulous, obsessive care. The skull was found 50 yards away, resting in a crevice of rock with its empty eye socket staring back down toward the valley and the camp he would never return to. The most chilling detail was the boots. Or rather, the lack of them. His sturdy hiking boots were never found. Not on the ridge. Not in the creek. Not anywhere in the miles of wilderness between the 2 points. It is a common thread in these missing 411 cases. The removal of footwear in the final moments. It suggests a state of mind we cannot comprehend, or a ritual performed by something that views our clothing as a curiosity rather than a necessity. How did a man with no climbing gear reach a ledge that seasoned mountaineers struggled to navigate? How did he survive long enough to climb 3,000 vertical feet in the dead of night without being spotted by the infrared cameras of the search helicopters? The authorities had no answers. Only theories about paradoxically undressing and the effects of hypothermia. But hypothermia doesn't explain the folding of the shirt, or the sheer physical impossibility of the location. The mountain air is a strange medium. It carries sound in ways that trick the ear and bends light in ways that deceive the eye. Some say there are portals in the rock, thin spots in the fabric of our reality where a man can step through and find himself in a world that is almost like our own. But wrong. Others speak of the shimmering ones, the entities that camouflage themselves against the bark and the stone, watching us with cold, ancient curiosity until we wander too far from the fire. The case of Jaryd Atadero comes to mind when you look at the heights of the Saint Malo ridges. In 1999, a young boy vanished on a trail in the Big Thompson Canyon, only for his remains to be found years later on a sheer cliff face that defied all logic. The same patterns emerge over and over again. The proximity to water, the granite boulders, the impossible terrain, and the silence that swallows the screams of the lost. We like to think that we are the masters of the wild, that our technology and our maps have conquered the unknown. But the missing 411 phenomenon proves that there are still places on this earth where we are nothing more than prey. The Rockies are a graveyard of the missing, a vast, beautiful tomb that keeps its secrets locked behind the high ridges and the deep timber. You can go to Camp Saint Malo today. You can stand by the chapel on the rock and look up at the peaks of Mount Meeker. The sun will be warm on your face, and the creek will sing its silver song just as it did 50 years ago. But if you listen closely, if you let the noise of the world fade away, you might hear that sudden drop in the wind. You might feel that prickle on your neck. And you might see a ripple in the air between the pines. Don't run, because running only makes the chase more interesting for the things that live in the shimmer. Just stay in the light. Keep your boots laced tight. And never, ever, to look back at the tree line after the sun goes down, because the mountains are watching, and they are always hungry for another story to add to their collection. The investigation into the Saint Malo vanishing remains open in the minds of those who know the truth. The official records will tell you one thing, but the ground and the wind will tell you another. Every year, thousands of people enter our national parks, and every year, some of them simply cease to be. They are not dead. They are not alive. They are just gone, absorbed into the granite and the pine needles of a landscape that doesn't recognize our existence. Think about that the next time you step off the paved path. The next time you decide to take a shortcut through the brush to get a better view of the creek. You are stepping into a domain that is older than your gods and colder than your heart. The mountain is waiting, and it has all the time in the world. The silence is returning now. The shadows are growing long across the scree. It is time to leave the high places and return to the safety of the valley floor. But remember, even in the valley, the peaks are always looking down. They see everything, and they forget nothing. Stay safe out there, and keep your eyes on the tree line, because you never know when the shimmer will find you.